So what I'd like to do is to introduce our three panelists for today. Jason, would you mind telling us a bit about yourself and a bit about the organisation Borough Happold?
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Jason Kane. I'm the Global Director of IT for Borough Happold. I've been with Borough Happold for about 10.5 years, officially my longest ever time in one organisation, but I've held multiple roles over that time, and like I guess most of the other panelists on the call wear multiple hats. You know, get people shouting at you for laptop problems right through to your business systems and ERP platforms and security, which is our favourite topic, as well as digitisation, of course. So Borough Happold, Borough Happold, we're an international integrated consultancy of engineers. So if you go to the Olympic Park in London, go to what is now the West Ham Stadium, that is one of our projects. We were heavily involved in the Olympics. If you go to Dubai, to the recently opened Museum of the Future, that is one of our projects. So we operate in 26 locations worldwide. We're a partnership, so we have 70 partners or 70 plus partners, and we've just tipped over 2,000 employees, aggressively targeting to double in size over the next 6 years.
Excellent. Thanks, Jason. Simon, if I could ask you the same question.
Yep, good morning. So Simon Blimont, Chief Information Officer. So I work for Hayes McIntyre. We're a firm of chartered accountants. Quite a simple setup. So a single office. We're based in the City of London. Headcount is around 400, of which we have about 40 partners, so a limited liability partnership. Mostly organic growth over the years. So I've been with them also sometimes, about 20 years. And working with Silver Sands actually for about 25 years. So worked with a previous company. So obviously known these guys quite some time. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. And Stuart.
Good morning. My name's Stuart McSkimming. I'm Chief Information Officer at the Royal British Legion. I've worked here for a couple of years, but I've worked in the charity sector for much, much longer than that in a variety of roles in a variety of charities. Royal British Legion, this is a very exciting time of year for us when we have a lot of events going on. We get very busy. But what's particularly great for us this year is this is our 100th anniversary. So we're just celebrating our centenary, which is fantastic news for us. Over the coming few weeks, you'll probably be seeing a lot of our property collectors out on the streets. So busy time of year for us.
Excellent. Thanks, Stuart. So there are panelists. And what I'd like to do now is get stuck in and start asking some questions. So I'm going to ask Simon. Take us back 2 years ago. Seems like a long time.
Yeah.
Hardly
Cast your mind back.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Tell us about the working practices within your organisation, what it was 2 years ago.
Yeah, fine. So out of that headcount I just mentioned, about 400, we're about 120 audit staff. That's relevant because that was really the only sort of hot desking and hybrid working before COVID. So the idea of those 120 staff is they're generally sort of roving around the various areas of the country. Most of our work is UK auditing. So we had a small amount of kind of hot desking where we had an allocation of desks for the audit staff. And there was a ratio of whatever it was to X many staff to a desk. Beyond that, I guess we'd start to do a little bit, of very ad hoc hybrid working. So, myself, if I was working on a report or something where I just needed to be on my own and not bothered by people, I'd generally do it from home. But there was no real culture of home working. In fact, I guess part of our business, one of our USPs in terms of the way we work, is we're very sort of client focused, and we like to see ourselves as not just, we provide a range of audit accountancy services, so audit and tax, but we like to be seen as an advisor, professional advisor with our clients. And I think if you boil down our company to its absolute barest facts, it's about relationships. And one thing I've always said, and I still strongly agree with even after COVID or during COVID, is that relationships really are only built up and forged in person. So there was very much a culture of, therefore, our partners, our chargeable staff were with clients. We had lots of clients come into our office, and therefore, obviously, that's not very that doesn't really work so well. Well, it didn't work in the past so well with people working from home. So it was very much a culture of you're at your desk, you're out, lots of networking events, lots of seminars, in-person seminars we do in the office. So we'd frequently have 100 people, 100 clients or contacts in, sort of listening to us talk about, whatever range of accountancy services. So very little, I think, is the answer. So other than the audit staff, very little hybrid working, hot desking, and the culture was very much you were generally at your desk. So yeah, I think that kind of sums up life before COVID.
Okay. Thank you. So Stuart, the same question. Tell me about the Legion and the working practices a couple of years ago.
So the Legion is quite a widespread organisation. We've got over 200,000 members. We've got 50,000 volunteers. We've got about 1,500 staff. 2 years ago, those staff were based in a number of different places. We have 6 care homes across the UK. We have a warehouse, and we had a number of offices, I think about 40 different offices across the UK. And so staff were also, some of them, the staff were remote workers, but we had quite a lot of people based in different offices across the UK. We obviously also have our branches, which don't sit as part of the core part of the charity, but many of you will be aware of the clubs all around the country, Royal British Legion clubs. They're not a core part of the charity, but they're nevertheless locations we have where members and local branches carry out their work. So as an organisation, we were quite a complex organisation, and even though myself as an office worker, I felt very much I was in an office-based location, office-based organisation. There were probably only about 400 of us in an office-based location set up, with the other 1,100 being split between care homes, remote work, and working within our warehouse.
Okay, interesting. So Jason, finally, tell us a bit about yourself 2 years ago.
So, Christ, 2 years ago feels slightly different, I guess, to the others in that because we're multi-office and we're international, we traveled a lot. So we had people flying everywhere, visiting different offices. Like the professional services organisation. So our value is our knowledge, and that knowledge, I totally agree with Simon, is best imparted face to face. And I think, we predominantly were office based, but we had different levels of maturity in the organisation depending on the geographical region. So in the UK, we were a bit more open to, if you wanted to work from home, a day or so you could. Whereas if you went to Asia, the culture was very much you had to be in the office. So, however, one of the things that we did, benefit of hindsight is always a wonderful thing, but perhaps we got a few things right. We adopted about 3 years ago, a laptop only strategy, which really came into its own in terms of facilitating people working from home. So we started to shift towards more of a mobile culture in terms of moving around rather than necessarily work from home culture. Okay.
So interesting. So we 2 years ago, we've all kind of come from a slightly different place, and our organizations are obviously different in terms of how we operate. But let me now ask Stuart, when lockdown hit, what were the big challenges in terms of enabling the organization to keep functioning, enable people to keep working, enabling people to keep communicating?
Yeah, so we probably, I think there were probably two prongs to our challenges. I think the one of the biggest challenges for us actually was the care homes, which obviously went into a super lockdown, and we had to work out exactly how we were going to communicate with those care homes and support them, when really they didn't want IT staff particularly just turning up there to go and fix things, and that was no longer on the cards. And I think in terms of our office work, there was some very big changes there, because we had, as I say, we had these staff who were office based, and we weren't as lucky. And so we didn't have laptops across the organisation. We had a very small number of laptops actually, and generally we had staff coming into offices using desktops. I think we cottoned on about early February that there was this was coming our direction, and so I remember getting together a meeting of people in early February and saying, okay, we've got a big problem here. We've got to start planning for this. And one of the first things we did was we tried to start getting laptops out to our staff as fast as we possibly could. And I remember just authorizing, okay, let's buy another 100 laptops. Okay, time to buy another 100 laptops, and getting them as fast as we could. And but that's even with getting in early from the beginning of February, we still faced problems that there was a global shortage of laptops as we got by the time we got into April. So we'd managed to get a lot of the staff who were who were organized enough to request a laptop. We managed to get them with their laptops, but we knew we still had a lot of staff we didn't have laptops there. And then the other problem was that we had software that was generally designed to be used in offices. We hadn't planned for this at all. We were very lucky that we had a number of initiatives all ongoing, which we could all accelerate. I think I would put that down to our single biggest bit of luck in terms of the pandemic. That there were about 5 different initiatives, such as moving to laptops, such as greater use of Office 365, such as moving away from Citrix. All of these things which we'd started work on, and so we were in a good place to continue that work, but at a much accelerated rate. We can talk more about that later, but at a rate which I would never have believed possible.
So interesting, Jason. Obviously, you'd already had the initiative in place to deliver laptops to people. What was your kind of biggest challenges when the lockdown started?
So we were looking at, 90% of our staff had laptops. However, we were on Skype for business, and that transition. So actually, let me rewind slightly. So we agreed, similar to Stuart, we sensed this was coming, and we said, actually, we've never done this scale of home working. Let's close our Bath office for a week and see how we get on. So of course we got the logistics in place to arrange for that. But by the time we got to doing that trial of theoretically closing our Bath office, which is one of our larger offices in the UK, we'd already closed Copenhagen and Warsaw, and so they were already working from home. So we were already feeling that. But the biggest challenge with logistics, it was getting things like monitors to people's homes. It was onboarding new staff, staff that were coming in. We couldn't induct them into the office. So it was getting equipment to them. But I think we were very lucky, similar to Stuart, in that we had a few things in the pipeline. So we were starting to do some work in terms of looking at Teams. We were already very heavy Office 365 users, but we were still stuck with on-premise Skype for telephony, audio, video, and we took advantage really, and we accelerated our Teams transition into a 3-month project from a 2-year program into 3 months, and we literally moved heaven and earth to get the audio video experience improved, because for those of us who were using Skype, it really sucked. It just didn't suck, right? And within 2 weeks, we worked very closely with Microsoft on a fast track program. We had audio and video transitioned over to Teams. We then moved all of our project filing, which we used to do on file servers, into SharePoint and Teams. And we did that in month 2. And month 3, we moved all our telephony over. Wow. So and it was fantastic because the business was really engaged to do that. It's the fastest transition I've ever done of a technology platform ever. So and we're still leveraging that benefit now. We're still getting those benefits of the collaboration that Teams has brought, but also felt the pain points of Teams perhaps not being quite as mature as Zoom at the time.
We'll come back to that point, I'm sure.
Actually, can I chip in with a question, either Jason or Simon? I'm curious, when you were planning this, what timescales did you think you were dealing with? Because that was one of the biggest challenges we had. Not knowing, was this there was very much an expectation, I think, that this was 3 months we might have this working from home culture. No one really knew what the end end date for this was, and I'm pretty certain none of us predicted that this could be going on for 12 months, 18 months.
So from the Bureau Happold perspective, and I sit on our crisis management team as part of business continuity, so we were getting together, pretty much every other day as this was happening. We initially thought this would be a 3 to 6 month issue. That almost a kind of seasonal flu. Are people over panicking at this stage? It wasn't really until we start to see the death count starting to rank up that we took it perhaps much more seriously. But yeah, certainly we were in the 3 to 6 month territory in our initial thinking.
Similar for us, actually. We went through sort of like a 2-stage process. So stage 1, I can't remember, Jason or Stuart, one of you two mentioned about kit being a challenge. That was a huge challenge to us. So before kind of, I suppose in February, by February, so obviously a month before lockdown, really, it was sort of end of March, wasn't it? We'd got 90% of the workforce on laptops, so that is mostly aligned with just the way we were working anyway. So going back to, I mentioned about, a huge part is our audit staff and audit managers. So there's lots of kind of going out on site to review work that's been done by staff. So we'd sort of moved into that mobile space of nearly everybody having a laptop, so that was fine. But the problem we had in the office is everybody was on sort of 2 21.5-inch monitors, and everybody was absolutely used to that. And of course, as accountants, we're dealing with spreadsheets and often sort of quite complex sort of applications and calculations and figures. So as we were running out of the office end of March, we were literally just kind of throwing kit around, and as we were all aware, global supply chain issues hit instantly, and you literally could buy nothing for quite a few weeks. So we were throwing kind of portable screens around, and again, we just started before COVID to look at that as a audit staff going on site, giving them a whatever it's 13, 14-inch portable screen to match their laptop. So we were throwing those around, literally buying sort of 100, 200, whatever. We did that for sort of 3 to 6 months, and a bit like all of us, we kind of went, well, it'll probably be over by then. And then of course it wasn't, and then we moved into sort of the second phase where we started, and this was kind of autumn, and that was obviously we'd started going out in summer, and then obviously life got bad again in September. And then it was at that point went, right, okay, we now need to really start looking at transforming the business. And that was actually our proper sort of our kickstart to hybrid working, where we had then had a very different strategy over kit. So yeah, it was first phase, just get people working, monitors, mice, keyboards, and then second phase was actually doing it properly. So
yeah, we went through very similar something. Because again, we're an engineering firm, so we're working in very complex models. So again, dual monitor setup in the office. But we basically said to people that we're doing our best here. Again, we couldn't get supply, to facilitate, and we were literally robbing monitors out of corners of storage in the offices to get them to people's homes. But what we also did was we gave people an allowance to go buy desks and to buy chairs, such that they had proper equipment at home, and we start doing DSE assessments on them as well. So we position it from, we're not just giving this, but actually we really care about your well-being as well. And I think the other thing which, less on I guess the technology side, was we were starting to really start worrying about people's well-being and mental health, because I think most of us would say the second lockdown was harder than the first. It was a novelty factor to the first. But we have lots of graduates who are in multiple houses of occupancy that they struggle to actually work from home. So we were starting to ramp up thinking perhaps less as well about the technology as we started to evolve, but more into that, what are we going to do for people's well-being as well?
That's a really interesting point, Jason, and I guess poses to Simon. At what point in the process, did HR get involved in thinking about these type of things, not just the logistics of how to enable people to work remotely, but the impact of people working remotely, taking Jason's point about the well-being?
Probably a month or two, but yeah, absolutely resonated in terms of what Jason just said. So there was that element of the start of just throwing kit around, just physically getting people working, and the other issue that we had, a significant issue, and we all knew about this, but my God, didn't we really know about it a couple of months into COVID, was just the state of broadband provision in this country, about how shocking it is. Everybody has broadband, but we use an SSL VPN as our primary means of remote access. It's a great piece of technology, but of course it needs a half decent broadband connection. So we had lots of issues with that, and throwing sort of unlimited limited data SIMs around in MiFi routers. So we did that for a couple of months, got people working, got teams working, making sure people, teams are having calls and people were actually starting to feel as if they were part of something and not just being thrown out of the office in this kind of turmoil. And then, maybe a couple of months in, 2 months, certainly by 3 months, there was a huge drive by our ops partner and our HR around kind of mental health of staff. And, that just kind of escalated really as the year went by. And again, Jason, as you just said, there was, and it sounds a bit weird, but there was an element of actually, I think if you're in IT for the first lockdown, there was an element of actually not fun, that's inappropriate as a word, but there was a, hey, this is something new and funky, and this is all of our DL stuff we've only ever talked about on paper and in exercises, and we're kind of doing this for real, and we're actually seeing our organizations work entirely from home. So there was a flying by the seat of your pants type attitude, and my team was certainly kind of not loving it, but they were being tested, and there was process re-engineering on the fly on an hourly basis sort of thing. And then, of course, kind of it went on. Yes, okay, summer came around, we all went out and ate out to help out, etc. And then things started going bad in autumn, and then that's where we started to see our mental health issues of our staff really started to kick in. And certainly January, even for myself, I described January and February as very dark days for lots of people in our organisation. It was winter, you couldn't go out, it was dark most of the hours of the day, and we did lots of kind of team-based kind of wine tasting. We were sending wine kits home and kind of cheese tasting or whatever. There's lots of stuff, and online yoga sessions, but we ramped that up. We were not particularly great at that before, but actually I think that's one of the massive positives that come out of COVID, that we've really now sort of massively kind of gone into that and looking after staff welfare. So
and on a similar vein, Stuart, how has it impacted throughout the period of people joining the organization, your onboarding process for new staff, obviously not being able to come into an office environment and meet people? How's that changed over the last 18 months?
Well, it's interesting because as I said, throughout the pandemic, one of the most challenging bits, which has relaxed a bit, but has always been trying to know whether you're planning for the next 3 months, the next 6 months, the next year, or the next 2 weeks, because things change quite rapidly. But I think one of the things we recognized fairly early on was we started discussing things that could work well remotely and things that didn't work as well remotely. And the list is really interesting how that list has shifted. So the things that wouldn't work well remotely was a very long list to start off with. People had many assumptions about things which would work better face to face, and I think gradually over time that list has shifted to most things can work pretty well remotely, and onboarding new starters was probably one of the last things on that list of things which needs to be done face to face. We have onboarded new starters. We've during the pandemic, even within my team, I can't remember the exact number, but I think there's probably at least 7 or 8 new people we've had started in the last 18 months. And I've chatted to a few of them to understand how has it worked for them, has the process worked well. And actually, they've all been they've all been surprisingly upbeat about it, and said it's defied their expectations, because obviously all of them, this is the first time they've really started a job remotely, and I think generally they've said it's worked an awful lot better. The ability that people have, the way that people take time to actually have Teams calls with them, where they will actually slot in someone will call them up, have a really personal one-to-one chat with them, and they'll get to know their colleagues quite well. I think people have made more of an effort in this way to actually get to know people when they started, because they've realized, oh, it's going to be a really tough gig for so-and-so who's starting in the team. Let's really help them. I'd say one of the other, the technology side of it, I don't that was a real challenge. How do you get that whole onboarding a new staff member, where they finished on Friday in their old job sitting in the home office, they start on Monday in their new job sitting in the same home office, but with your equipment rather than the previous employer's equipment, and trying to get all of that to work, getting laptops out to staff, getting those laptops built, being able to do that rapidly when everyone starts having expectations that you can be like Amazon Prime and there can be a 24-hour turnaround on these things. That's been a real challenge, getting those new starters onboarded with their new equipment. But again, I think it's one of these things that if we'd looked at this 2 years ago and I'd said, listen, what we need to be able to do is if we've got a new starter, someone starting, we need to be able to onboard them completely remotely. We need to be able to get a laptop shipped to them within 48 hours of it being requested. We need that laptop to be set up remotely in their home, get them all logged on. I would never have thought that possible, but the challenge, we've definitely risen to that challenge, I think.
I think, Jason, you echoed the same point, that logistics was one of the key challenges, is getting equipment to people.
Yeah, I think I would say it was the logistics of getting equipment to them and also from them as well. People leaving it, albeit, you know, and you know, one of our biggest fears now, of course, is there's this compounded risk that we're now running because the churn rate has been so low. And you know, we've got people who've actually left now because the pandemic has been a bit of a wake-up call. They want a lifestyle change. They've moved to Devon or, you know, from London, etc. And they're looking at their lifestyles now. But I think, you know, it's really good for us. I think when we look and we do a culture survey, and we did a culture survey earlier this year, we do it every 2 years, and we asked some questions around how we handled COVID, and 96% of our staff responded that they thought we handled it well, because the line of communication from the leadership was just very open. Because of course, you go back to those first few months after we started working from home, people started to worry about their jobs. You know, you saw furlough kicking in, and people really worried as to what was going to happen. The one thing I'll say is I don't miss the Zoom quizzes. I have to say, they've got a little bit for my liking. But I think, you know, we also, and I think we're living with the benefits of COVID accelerating perhaps some of our digitization. So, you know, we did a lot of wet signatures on paper for contracts, etc. So, you know, we completely adopted DocuSign and Adobe Sign, different for HR and our commercial team, and we really accelerated that. But also, in that early days of working from home, so very similar to you, Simon, we publish very little out over the internet. We're very, you know, I like a small footprint on our security exposure. So everything was VPN, which is clunky, heavy. So we start to look at actually how could we streamline the access to our ERP platform. So with Teams, we start to roll out bots. So actually, if you want to do an expense claim, you can do that via Teams. If you want to do an absence request, you do that via Teams. You don't even go to our ERP platform anymore. We've adopted this kind of headless approach. So we're still living with the benefit now of looking at how we streamline our business processes as well.
Simon, a question. All the panelists have talked about their organizations being very people-centric and people-focused in terms of face-to-face. And I'm interested to understand how, as an organization, you would have, you know, had to carry on functioning and deliver your services throughout the lockdowns on the basis that the services were traditionally delivered face-to-face, be it audit on customer site, be it, you know, the sessions that you'd run. I'm interested in how you transitioned and what challenges you had in transitioning to keep delivering those services.
Yeah, so I mean, I mean, it was a huge issue. So probably audit is the favorite example. So I think I mentioned kind of, you know, our previous life of auditing was an auditor would go out on site and go and work with the finance team and look at documents. And if we're doing stock taking and stock checks, we'd go and look at things in a factory. And obviously all of that just suddenly had to stop. So head of audit and you know, his team worked on a load of process re-engineering, and we've now devised essentially a remote auditing capability, which is not efficient. There's no two ways about it. For example, the way it would have worked in the past is that an auditor would have, or an audit team would have gone out on site for, say, a week, and then a manager would have popped in at some point. It's a very serial kind of fashion. You did an audit, you finished it, you started another audit. What we found when we moved to a remote system was that because you're not sat in front of people and people can avoid things when it's kind of, you know, you're asking across Teams or email or whatever, is we weren't getting information quick enough. So we've actually now moved to a more parallel manner where we'll actually be running several jobs concurrently. So that's just one example of one of our, probably certainly our biggest service in terms of fee income, where there was a huge amount of, processing, re-engineering that went into it. But again, you make it work, don't you? And I suppose, certainly this is true for our organisation. I'm sure for many organisations. When we went into lockdown, yes, we'd done the BCP and the DR, and we knew that technology would essentially work, and all of our systems were all cloud-based anyway. So there was never really any issue around that. And of course, we thought about, from a business continuity point of view, about making sure services are working, and silly examples of making sure the finance director's got a smart card reader at home when he's having to authorize payments from the bank, etc. So we'd done all that, but we never really knew how long this was obviously going to go on for. And then, of course, it went on for ages. And we'd never really thought about how to make sure an audit could work fully remotely, or a tax job or whatever. So massive challenges, but we made it work. And going back to, I suppose, one of my favourite points, when we went into lockdown, did we really know if our firm could cope? No, we didn't. We absolutely did not know. And it probably took about a month, and suddenly, we were all turning around going, hey, gosh, we're actually making this work. And, we are kind of re-engineering process, a bit like, we talked about onboarding, and obviously nobody really had any leavers for a couple of months, but we were still recruiting. And actually, as the months went by, we were recruiting quite heavily. So, of course, we had to have a complete remote onboarding process. But, I think that's the great thing about us as humans and as companies. We have to adapt. And I think, Jason, you making that point, we've just massively accelerated digitization and kind of looking at ways of doing things better. And that's one of the positives that's come out of the situation.
Can I just build on Simon's point there a little, because I think there's something very interesting that's happened in the last year or two, where people have moved from face-to-face interactions to more interactions like this over Teams, and I've noticed that the quality of interaction I get with people over Teams is quite often higher, and by that what I mean is that people will look up information whilst they're in a call or a meeting. People will draw up notes. People will be able to make decisions better because they've got more information at their fingertips when they're sitting in front of a computer like this, rather than just sitting in a room with maybe a PowerPoint presentation. And I think for a while we've always known that as technology and time progressed, that our ability to carry out our jobs would be more and more augmented by technology. So not that we would be replaced by technology and automated like RPA or something like that, but that we would actually find that we were able to use technology more and more to augment what we were doing in our day-to-day lives. And I think this has just accelerated it, because we spend more and more of our time now very close to technology, where we're actually talking like this and the technology is there. So the opportunity there is for us to give all of our users, our staff within our organizations, more and more tools that will augment what they're doing, so they're able to actually work more effectively like this.
And Stuart, do you think that the last 18 months have built up sufficient momentum to maintain that pace of change, that pace of transformation, the appetite for it? Do you see that as we are going to continue on this trajectory and embrace and make more use of technology? Or do you believe there's a point where we've reached our saturation in terms of change and people need a break?
I don't think you can reach saturation with change. I always remember when we've been planning programs in the past, and we've drawn all these Gantt charts looking forward, and we'll say Q2 in 2 years from now, or there's a big red circle because we've got 5 different programs which are all going to be landing on users at the same time, and will users be able to cope with this level of change in their working lives? And I spent a lot of time hypothetically concerned about that in the past in my career, especially talking with HR teams and L&D teams, and talking about the impact on staff and will they deal with that level of change. What the pandemic has shown us is that actually people can deal with a tremendous level of change. The level of change which people dealt with was, I think, was unprecedented in terms of their working lives. And so maybe, whilst you were saying, mentioned not quite change fatigue or something like that, I would almost say that perhaps people build up more of a tolerance to change, and so when they've had a lot of change going on, it gives them the ability to cope with more change because they've become more adaptable to that change, and they haven't. So many people prior to the pandemic may not have experienced that much change in their role. They may have carried on going like they were for year on year, and so the more change you bring in, the more that people can adapt to that. So in that way, I mean, it really is giving us a great springboard, I think.
Yeah, I think to add on to Stuart's point, I think it's really interesting actually. So we adopted Teams last June. Was the core component of adoption of Teams for us. We actually did an update a couple of months ago to remind ourselves how much Teams has actually changed in the last 12 months. So, you know, we went through that big adoption curve in terms of adopting Teams. But if you look at the Teams as a product today to what it was 15, 16 months ago, it's a radically different product. And I'm a passionate believer in change is incremental. You know, you don't tell people we're going to go to that necessary destination Z. You tell them bus stop B and C, and you take them on that incremental journey. But I think the pandemic was quite unique. I think people adapted to change because they were frightened as much as anything else, and you know, so I don't think people are perhaps quite as open, and as we said earlier, there was a novelty factor to it as well in that kind of, certainly the first lockdown, you know. So but I think for me now, change is much more incremental. I don't think we're going to do these big bang system changes. You know, if you've fully adopted Office 365 as an example, probably our next biggest one is going to be our ERP platform that we're replacing at the moment. There's an 18-month transition, but from then on I think it'll be incremental changes, and certainly we're drip feeding out. The problem for me is less the technology adoption. Where we're struggling is basic things like etiquette. You know, and people don't, you know, people complain I'm in, you know, back-to-back Teams meetings, I'm not making time. So we've defaulted Outlook settings to 25 minutes rather than half an hour, 50 minutes rather than an hour, to force people to have that change. But even by doing that, we've alienated half the practice who don't like to be spoon-fed how to use the system, to deal with those that are really struggling with that etiquette change. So we're spending a lot of time on etiquette, but also as we normalize with hybrid working, we're really fearful about how we provide equity to those people that are in an office versus out of the office, you know, not as visible. So I think that's where our change focus is going to be now, is on the etiquette, the culture, and the equity side of it, rather than necessarily the replacement of the core technology itself.
That's very interesting, Simon. The taking the point about the etiquette, what Jason said. Yes, we have actually fundamentally changed the way we communicate, because we went back 2 years ago. The, you know, face-to-face meetings are different than video conferencing. Teams chat is different than emails. I mean, I wouldn't have dreamt to send my boss an emoji 2 years ago. Now, you know, we're getting there. But yeah, so as you say, you know, things are different. So how's that been within your organization?
I think, yeah, so I think actually in a way it's probably made us a little bit less formal, and just thinking back to life before COVID, you know, we were still actually quite a formal organization. It was only about 2 years ago, perhaps a year before, in fact, probably a year before COVID, that we were still expected the guys were in a suit every day. That's just how life was. And we'd started that kind of, the other thing, I guess, with us as a partnership, as you get the younger partners coming through, they obviously have a different outlook on life. So we'd started to be, you know, we'd got an informal or dress for your day type dress code. And actually that kind of culture and shift has just kind of carried on. And you're absolutely right, James, around the emoji. I mean, you know, we would have never done that. And rather like what you've just said, you know, I've now sent smileys or, you know, whatever to people I'd have never dreamt of doing. But I think the thing that I'm hoping is going to work for us now is, you know, one of our big change, or probably our biggest change for our firm, is actually we agreed sort of, you know, end of last year, that as kind of came, you know, as we all came back into an office, that we would go fully hybrid working, and that's what we've now done. So we invested a load of money into doing an office refurb to support that change, and we now have a default hybrid working approach. So every meeting has a Teams invite on the invite. There's no expectation, obviously there will be some exceptions to this, but there's no expectation you have to be in the office to have a meeting. We've changed all of our quiet rooms. All of our meeting rooms had AV kit anyway, but all of our quiet rooms, all of our sofa pods, everything's now got AV kit in it to have a Teams meeting. So the culture has absolutely become a default hybrid working model going forward, and it is, yes, on a more relaxed basis, and we're way less big brotherish. I mean, we were never really into that anyway. But there was a bit, going back to, I think I said earlier about how we used to work. There was an expectation. Generally, you're at your desk, and if you weren't at your desk, you probably weren't working. And obviously, all that's just been blown out of the water. And there were, even various of our partners that would have absolutely said, yeah, if you're not at your desk, you're not working. And those same partners, 6 months into the pandemic, said, yeah, obviously, I've had to change my approach. And it turns out that we can make the organisation work, and the culture has become more relaxed. We are still obviously focused absolutely on productivity. It's one of our sort of KPIs that we look at. But yeah, I think the culture change has been certainly for the better as a result.
And I wanted to move. Sorry, Stuart, please.
Sorry, I was just going to say, to build on that, I found that people take more ownership of their time now. So previously, when we were in offices all the time, there was you could have looked at it as the company owns you from 8:30 to 5 o'clock or whatever when you're in the office, and that's company time. You're owned. When you're working remotely, it's your time, because you flip, you take breaks, you go off, you do things, you make a cup of coffee, sometimes you'll take a walk in the middle of the day, and that means you've taken a lot more ownership of your own time, and so you are much more likely to therefore try and make sure that you make it work. So rather than in an office where you have an hour-long meeting. Now, to me, an hour-long, if I get a meeting for an hour-long meeting invite, I think that's so 2019. A meeting might be 40 minutes or 50 minutes or 25 minutes, but an hour. But you would just fill the gap because it was company time. You would just make it. It would just fill the gap. It's just the same as if you have a cupboard, it fills to whatever you put in it. The time would just fill to that. Whereas now people are taking ownership of their own time, and I think that's making us more efficient.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Completely agree.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about the challenges during the lockdown, and we've talked a bit about how you've kind of navigated your way through these. One thing we haven't touched upon, which is something I'm noticing more and more as people are coming back in the office, there are new challenges. So interested, Jason, whether you've noticed there's challenges with people returning back to the office, and working hybrid.
It was really interesting. So we started to return to the office back in September. So we set the 4th of September as an arbitrary date, certainly for the UK business. Unfortunately, our colleagues in India are still at home because they're still in a lockdown situation. But for most of our offices, we've returned to a certain extent. We rolled out tools like Condeco for booking desks, etc. And back in kind of September, we still had social distancing in the offices, which we've now removed. But I remember going into our London office, and I was which normally would cope with 400 people in our London or Bath office, our two largest offices. And I was maybe one of 10 people in that first week of September. And there was almost there's no point going to the office if there's nobody else here to bounce ideas off and to gel with. And there was a real concern on, are we going to get people back into the office? So we as a practice, we've adopted an approach of we encourage people to go into the office 2 to 3 days a week, but it's not a mandate, it's an encourage. But also we've classed it as a pilot, and we've been very open to say we just don't know what the endpoint is going to look like, because we're trying to balance what you want, because let's be honest, a lot of people have enjoyed the savings of not traveling in terms of dark time, the commuting time, as well as the financial aspect. So we positioned that way, but we've now got our occupancy levels up to about 40%. And that is also, we've reduced the desking that we've got. So we've created, as Simon, you said, we've created a lot more breakout spaces and informal meeting spaces. So we're seeing some resistance. Some people just do not want to go back to the office at all. And there's a real fear that we don't know the answer to, which is what's the long-term effect going to be on our culture? Because we were such everybody sits together in their team structure. Now that's very hard to do when you've got in effect, a hot desk booking system where you could be on a different floor each time you go into the office. It's very hard to create those community. So we're still learning, and we haven't quite decided the layout of our floors yet. We haven't decided, are we going to go auditorium style in this area, breakout there? I think the old meeting room, it will always be there. It's got a purpose. But the one thing personally I struggled on that first week back in, when I went into the office, I'd forgotten how to run a meeting in a meeting room. I'd actually forgotten how to do it. It'd been that long, and it's really difficult. It's back to that equity piece of where you've got remote participants. How do you make sure you're treating them equally when you're sharing a meeting with other people in person? So I think that's for me is where the challenge is going to be, is balancing the hybrid around equity, but also what is that? Our culture has to change, because we're not going to be able to have water cooler moments every day as we were, but also what we don't want is people to go to the office to sit doing meetings that they could do at home, because what we're also seeing is it's affectionately called the TWT thing, which is nobody wants to go to the office on a Monday or Friday. So again, with restricted seating, it's compounding that problem. But we're also trialing 4-day working weeks as well. And one of our biggest suppliers, Autodesk in the UK, have actually formally adopted a 4-day working week, so they don't work Fridays anymore. In fact, you can't contact them on a Friday. So again, we're looking at what are the other things that we need to do, because we haven't quite defined what hybrid is.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's okay. It'll evolve, and we may end up with different settings for different teams depending on what they need and their working styles. A bit like learning styles. There isn't a one size fits all, I don't think, here.
Stuart, how's the Legion in the same vein? What initiatives, what decisions have you made in respect of hybrid working?
So hybrid working is challenging, I would say, and dealing with this change is really challenging. It was about last December we started thinking. I kept thinking, okay, there's going to be a point where we're going to start having some people in, some people at home, and that's going to be a difficult thing. We started planning for it, and it kept getting put off. But much like Jason, for us, it was about the second week of September. We've suddenly found that we've shifted now, and we've started having people coming into offices, and we're probably not at 40% capacity. I think we're probably more like 25% capacity, and that's over Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We're identical Mondays and Fridays. I was actually in our office yesterday, and Mondays is empty. There's no one in on a Monday or Friday. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, people. The challenges are around trying to maintain an office environment when there's not people there all the time. Things get unplugged, things gets moved around. So we've got docking stations so people can bring their laptops in. One of the big steps we took was we removed all of our desktops, so because we didn't want to end up having to maintain lots of devices, so we went for one user, one device, so everyone has one laptop, brings their laptop in, but we have then docking stations, and then there's questions about whether people want to share keyboards or mice, so people pick up, tend to keep their own keyboard and mouse. So there's a lot of plugging and unplugging that goes on, and equipment goes missing, and the problem with meeting rooms and the problems with mixed meetings is that we've all got used to talking to each other like this, where the quality Teams, as we've said, has changed a lot over the last few months, and the quality is so good now. So I can see everyone's faces, I can look into their eyes, I can hear, the audio is always pretty much perfect. Whereas you then stick some people in a meeting room and suddenly the audio is not as good generally. You can invest in that, and you can put lots more microphones in to try and improve that, but you'll still end up with basically a camera pointing down on a meeting room where you've got lots of little faces that as they get further away from the camera, you can't even pick out the facial expressions. So the experience for the remote person, or one or two remote people, is far inferior to this experience, and it might be superior for the people who are actually in the room, but the remote people, it's definitely inferior. So those mixed mode meetings are a real challenge, and I think what we've discovered is it's quite hard to avoid mixed mode meetings. At the start of this, we decided maybe what we'll try for is we'll have meetings all online or all face to face, but not not go for those mixed meetings, but that's very difficult to make work because there's generally always someone who can't make the meeting for some late reasons. There'll be something like, I don't know, their child will be isolating because of COVID, or there'll be people have adapted their lives around things, and so trying to get everyone to turn up in face-to-face for a meeting is difficult, and so you have to live with those mixed mode meetings, which are generally, I think everyone would agree, aren't as good as all face-to-face or all online.
I think, I mean, I just from my perspective, there is quite a lot of investment Microsoft are making in addressing that very problem to help these mixed mode meetings. I mean, I feel that if I'm in a mixed mode meeting, the people who are remote have the first class experience. The people who are in the meeting room together, typically either it's almost like reverse of where we were 2 years ago, where you dial into a meeting and feel like the third class citizen. Now the people in the room don't get the eye contact, they can't hear everything, they don't get, and they almost not excluded from the meeting, but it's very difficult for them to participate in the same way. But there is definitely some things coming down the road. Now I'm interested, I've had a conversation with Simon before. Simon, tell me about your hot desking policy that you have in place.
Yeah, so as part of that sort of refurb that I just talked about, and actually same as you, Jason, so we opened up whenever it was 6th of September was our back to the office. And everybody's roughly doing 2 days a week. And also interestingly, again, like everybody else has said, and it's really interesting now, I start to stand back and you can see patterns, can't you? Mondays and Fridays, as you said, are dead. And I know that because I get the tube, I get the district line for West London. And even on a Monday and Friday, I know that the number of people on that tube train is significantly less than Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays. So I think that's going to be a really interesting thing, just not for us, but for the city, for towns, cities to contend with in terms of just produce footfall. But yeah, so in terms of what we did is so when we did our refit, we essentially had, so we've got 270 desk spaces. So still we feel as though we've got quite a lot in terms of our 400 headcount, and we've got enough to see us for future growth. But we essentially went for a process of carbon copying every single desk. So every desk has got 2 monitors and a docking station. All of our laptops are USB-C connections, so a single cable into the laptop. And then I did quite a lot of research and looked at why people might resist coming back into the office. And the single biggest thing that I heard from was keyboards and mice. And people basically saying, I don't want to sit at that desk because the keyboard is dirty and it's had some of these fingers on, obviously, particularly with COVID. So what we did, and I think so far, touch wood, it seems to be working out. But we bought everybody a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse, and everybody's got a locker. So they are basically, and we do police this now quite heavily. So when you leave the office at the end of the day, there's not allowed to be anything on the desk. Anything that's on there gets put into a box of shame, and then you have to go groveling to our facilities manager to find your kits, any headsets, if you accidentally leave your mouse and you've put your keyboard away in your locker. But yeah, that's what we've done. So the expectation is you walk in every morning, it's a completely empty desk with your 2 monitors and your docking station. Go and get your keyboard and mouse out of your locker. And yeah, so far it seems to be working quite well. But but I think, Jason, as you were saying, what we've done is we don't really all know, do we, how this is all going to pan out. So we've said we'll do a formal 3-month review at Christmas. One of the issues that I'm having as my team, and well, particularly my service desk team, is have we got the right level of people in the office? That's probably our biggest challenge for our team. Have we got the right people to service the number of bodies on the floor? And of course, we don't really know what the number of bodies are on the floor. We know what it is now. Will that increase over time? Maybe. But yeah, so that's what we've done. And probably my biggest challenge is kind of just knowing about how my team are going to provide a service going forward and make sure this service is the right level.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. If you go back to the early days of the pandemic, I remember everybody saying the office is dead. We don't need offices anymore. And I think, then the mental health challenges start to surface and the fears around culture, etc. So I think, hybrid is going to be the norm from here on. But very similar to you, Simon, we've gone down on Bluetooth keyboards, mice, but also we've launched a kind of we called it Reimagine It, just because I couldn't think of anything smarter, which is our kind of future technology for to support people. So Reimagine IT, Reimagine It, and we start to evaluate, AirPods as our standard headset. So because when people are at home, we want them to feel they can have more freedom. They're not constrained by a wired-in headset. So, you know, we're trialing a lot more wireless technologies in terms of peripherals than perhaps we used to. And we've made 3 acquisitions this year. So we've had to adopt Macs for the first time. So we're now seriously looking at the MacBook. Of course, Apple have now thrown that curveball of going to the new chipset, so Windows is out the window, which is another variable thrown in at us. But we're really leveraging it to say, look, we're looking at the tool set of the future and help us to evaluate that. That gives you much more freedom. The one benefit of the pandemic was we had nothing stolen for like 18 months, you know, from the pub or nicked from, you know, when someone was at a pub. So we're starting to see that ramp back up now as people are losing equipment.
Well, my desk on the office has been stripped bare, apparently. Someone said that everything's on it, someone's taken. Jason, you raised a point earlier on, and I was going to ask Stuart this question, that people, you know, the employees, our workforce, this has gone on for long enough that people have changed. People have changed their expectations. People have reevaluated, I think you used the word there, kind of, you know, lifestyle choices. And Stuart, how are you finding that in terms of people's expectations of having to come into the office, or people's expectations of, you know, that their working day? How has that changed, and has that change been established, that we have to accept that people's expectations are different than they were 2 years ago?
I think people's expectations are different to where they were 2 years ago, but I'm not sure if they're settled expectations. I feel that we're still in this period of great change. And as I was just talking earlier, I was just thinking to myself, this will be quite amusing to watch us in 2 years' time or something like that. I think, oh, how naive we were back then in 2021. Little did we know that how this was going to go. And that's the problem, that people's expectations are changing, and we're all in this period of great experimentation, and we don't know quite where it's going to be at. So we're actually still on the wireless. We're still on wired mice and keyboards. And I was listening to Jason and Simon there with great jealousy, thinking, okay, that's it. Well, let's go out and buy some Bluetooth ones, and that'll solve all of our problems. But we also have this big problem that we have vast amounts of kit now that's not really needed. So we have rooms full of it, things that we used previously, which are no longer really suited to our work. So as a charity, it's the big question is it worth going off and spending lots of money? And even if a Bluetooth mouse and Bluetooth keyboard, they're individually not that expensive, you add them all up for all your users, and that's a big expenditure. And so you think to yourself, is that the bit of the experiment that we think is going to pay off, and should we do that? So in terms of people's expectations, I would say everyone has different expectations. And I would also say that there's something that happens, which always happens, is people like to use IT and technology as an excuse for doing things or not doing things. And so when we've been talking to people, we've also found that there's a little bit of that. When you're talking about what's the things that can make people come into the office and the mouse and the keyboards, there's a little bit of that people are like, yeah, I'd like to come into the office, and then using the technology. And so I'm trying to be careful not to react carefully to what we're hearing in terms of feedback, and not just to jump on if everyone says, you know, we need a bit of this or we need a bit more of that, to not just to go ahead and do it because sometimes that's not always the right answer. And I think the answer really here is just experimentation. It's about applying agile methods to things, try doing a little bit of it, seeing what works, not spending too much, piloting things. Everyone, I mean, we're in a 6-month pilot of our ways of working in my organization at the moment. I think everyone's trialing it. At the end of all of this, we'll find ourselves in a completely different world, I think, to where we started, but no one quite knows what that looks. There's not many people can predict what that will look like.
No, I certainly won't ask anyone to give me where we will be in 12 months' time. But I guess the question, putting aside the obviously devastating impact of COVID, but in terms of our organizations, Are we in a better place now? Do you think this has pushed us, nudged us, forced us to evolve into a better place? Simon?
I'd say so, yes. Yeah, I think, some of the examples I've given, perhaps I didn't talk about what Jason and Stuart mentioned, but, for example, we went into lockdown, we had some frankly cruddy bits of software that we were using because we just didn't get round to replacing it. And a bit like the proverbial builder in the state of their house, our accounting system was running on Sage Accounts 50, some legacy, sort of thick client rubbish that we just put up with because we didn't have to worry about it. It worked. And of course, trying to run that across a VPN is hideous. When you've got like a sort of however many hundreds of megabytes database at the back end. So it has made us do things that we didn't have to do. And yes, there was an awful lot of pain. And I think, Jason, was it yourself that mentioned about the e-signature software? Again, we were very traditional with our letters. We were using, a lot of it was going on email, but it was still a partner signed manually. We liked that kind of, sort of personal touch, but that's had to change. And that's frankly for the better. And then I mentioned about, the fact that we were a very formal organization. We'd started to become less formal, but COVID has made us more of an agile. We are able to react more quickly. We've clearly proven that our firm can be successful. We actually had some fairly decent growth in our last financial year to the end of 31st of March this year. Even that was a surprise to everybody. And it's just building on the successes going forward of what we've done well, learning from it, having the ability to react. We've all said that we don't know what the hell's going to happen, frankly, and what the state of the world will be in the next 6 or 12 months' time. But I think at least we are now in that mode where we can react, and we know we've been very successful in reacting. So, but yeah, I'd say we're in a better shape for it. So,
okay, Jason, have you got a view on that?
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting because the way our financial cycle works. So we had a very, very profitable, our best profit ever the previous year, because for 4 months no expenses were being incurred. So suddenly, the international travel, and it doesn't half make a difference. In terms of that not being spent. So our previous accounts were slightly inflated by that. I think. We did see some work, particularly as we're in the engineering construction sector. Some of that work went on hold temporarily. That recovered relatively quickly. So I think, our pipeline's really healthy. I mean, we've grown 10% this year. We've acquired 3 relatively modest organisations, which gave us about an 80 headcount increase across the 3 of those. So the business itself is probably the strongest it's been for an awfully long time. The workforce, I think, is more integrated than it ever has been, because if you would ask me kind of winter last year, I was really fearful as we got to spring this year that we were going to see massive churn. We haven't quite seen that come through. Yes, we've lost 1 or 2, certainly from IT. So IT for me is about 70 people globally. I've lost 2 that have left, which is, for me is pretty good, and I'm happy with that. But we spend a lot of time focused on the people side of things. So, we're rolling out learning ambassadors. We're really focused because we know that fight for talent is now there, out there, and people perhaps won't be as loyal as they were in the past because this was a massive wake-up call. So I think as an organisation we've come out of it stronger. I think our people have come out of it stronger, and I think the understanding of the value of IT and technology departments is probably more thoroughly understood, because I remember the fears at the start of the pandemic of, well, we're going to be able to do this, and budgets were not an issue at that particular stage to get this to work. And the pride for me is, we have an individual and a team award every year, and last year IT won the team award for the first ever time. Which, we're an engineering practice, so it's usually the fee earners win that, not the overhead. And in fairness, when we accepted it, I said this isn't just IT, it was HR, it was operations, facilities that made it work. But I think we've all come out of it a lot stronger than we were, and long may it continue.
Okay, excellent. Stuart, yourself, from the Legion's point of view.
So I think we've definitely come out. We've come through this very strongly, and I think the same as Jason and Simon have said. it's been really good for a technology team to actually make those changes. I'm starting to get a little bit worried about retention, which leads into the overall culture. And we said earlier we were worried about what impact this hybrid working or remote working would have on culture. So I think we're starting to now think about, okay, let's not just worry about it and just think, and think the solution is to get everyone in the office to retain our culture, but actually to think about how can we develop that culture, accepting the facts that we're going to be working in different ways, and so thinking of new ways that we can develop our culture. The other thing that worries me, that where I think as an organization we might be weaker, is long-term strategic thinking. I think we've got into a bit of a habit in the last 18 months of being more tactical, which has been out of necessity. It's been very hard to do long-term planning because no one quite knows 3 months, 6 months, a year from now where things are going to be. So all of our planning timeframes have been really squashed to plan for shorter periods, which has meant that we've got stuff done, and it's been really great, and it's been really invigorating. Actually, it's been really, really great to really get stuff done. But I tend to imagine that long-term strategic planning will be suffering a bit, and that we might all have got out of that habit a bit, and we might need to somehow relearn to think long-term again.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Stuart. So one of the things that I did, so we have a monthly town hall anyway, where we get together, and it's a bit of a cascade out, and I base it on a balanced scorecard format, so it's people, process, finance, etc. And we give project updates, but it's an information push out to the department. We actually quickly adopted that. So same as we used to do monthly phishing tests, we ramped that up to fortnightly as we start to work from home. We actually moved to a weekly roundtable where we got each office, the IT teams, to talk through what they were finding on the floor to really open up those conversations. And I think it was late summer, so around late August, that we went back to the monthly, and we said we've got to get back to normal. We've got to live with this now. This is normal. But I think the good thing for us is we had a new CEO come in May, who already worked for the firm, but he took up the CEO position, and he's adopted 136 as his approach. So again, we're doing we're doing a hybrid of the short term and the long term strategic thinking now. But I think it is one of those where it is easier to kind of get stuck into that short-term thinking, but I think you're right. And we certainly saw that is right. We've got to get back to 3-year planning now, but maintain the ability to be tactical.
Simon, does that resonate with yourself in terms of the need to, over recent times, to drive initiatives quickly, and perhaps a little bit now needing to think more about the longer term strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've all agreed we've all had to be very reactionary. Well, that was actually for a period of time. But yeah, towards the end of last year, so our 3-year business plan started actually from the 1st of April this year. So we were sort of forced to go back to thinking strategically, because that's what the partners were expecting from their 3-year plan, and obviously I'm aligned with that with my 3-year IT plan. So I think we were sort of forced in a way because it fell within the 3-year cycle. But absolutely, we did have conversations along the lines of we were just throwing money around to say buying kit for some time, and we were. And then, by kind of late summer, we were starting to think about, I've mentioned earlier about my phase 1 throwing kit around, getting people working. And then we suddenly went into, right, actually, we've got to start thinking more kind of strategic about what is the future kind of hybrid working role looking like, and actually buying different types of kit for people at home. So, yeah, I think I'd argue now that we're well and truly out of that reactionary phase, and we are now back into a proper strategic sort of thought. So.
Okay, thank you. So I've had a couple of questions that have come in on the chat, and they're broadly of a similar theme. So one, Jason, you mentioned about learning ambassadors, and this is just, could you clarify what you meant by learning ambassadors?
Yeah, so one of the things that I mentioned it earlier, we're really concerned about equity, culture, etc. And our chief people officer is very focused on what do we do around attraction and retention. So at the moment we're devising a HRIS strategy for the first ever time, because I don't know about the other panelists, but our HR team is quite siloed. you know, it's a team of teams, and they've historically been focused on their own bit. And our appraisal process is based, well, in fact, Silver Standard's helped us with it, is based on SharePoint. But of course, it doesn't mean you get qualitative data out of it. So one of the things that we our first getting our toe wet in the water was we bought an LMS solution for the first ever time, a learning management solution. And what we've adopted is in every office a learning ambassador, and we've bought LinkedIn Learning for pretty much 80% of the practice. And those learning ambassadors are there to help identify the courses that people need, but to work with a central learning and development team as part of HR to come up with a multi-year strategy for skills development in the practice. And that's just one, if you like, one vertical within what is going to be our wider HRIS strategy.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. Another question, Simon, you mentioned performance as a KPI, and the question is, how are you using technology to measure employee performance?
Yeah, so actually I think I'll use the word productivity. So we have a very simple set of KPIs around how our business works, and essentially our business is a service, so it's just people doing things. And one of the KPIs we always looked at is something called chargeability. So how much of your time is being charged to client work, and then ultimately how much of that is being billed. So we've had for many years, using our sort of ERP type system, a really good way of looking at how people are performing, because we just look at their chargeable statistics. So so we have, are you working on a client, or are you doing non-chargeable work? And non-chargeable is either what we call good non-chargeable, so training, learning, or holiday, and bad non-chargeable is we have this infamous non-chargeable code called Office. Nobody really knows what Office means, but generally we don't really know what you're doing. So what we said in terms of kind of the whole hybrid working and not worrying about people, I think I remember Stuart or Jason said earlier about you don't need to measure whether somebody's working from 9 till 5. We just look at our chargeable statistics, and if your chargeable statistics were of a level before, and therefore we looked at you as an individual and as a department, and if those have only gone up or not gone down, then of course that means productivity is either staying the same or increasing. So we've in a way, I think, in a lucky position that we've had this KPI that we've always been using for 20-30 plus years, that we still use to actually measure performance. And as long as that doesn't plummet, we don't really care how you work. And we now have lots of examples of people coming in at 10:30 in the morning and going home therefore later in the evening, or taking an afternoon off and making up the hours, because again, we don't really care as long as your productivity stats are not showing a degradation. So
okay, thank you. And I guess the last question I've got in the chat, and it's we've touched on this throughout the conversation, about the need to address staff retention, about the need to understand staff well-being, and it really just an open question. Is there any insights or initiatives that we haven't already covered that you'd like to share that you are putting into place to focus on staff retention, staff well-being, moving forward in this hybrid world?
So there's a couple of things we do. We've rolled out our mental health first aiders globally to every office. So very similar to where you see the list of fire wardens and first aiders, we have a category now of mental health first aider, which is something that our facilities and operations teams led on, which I'm exceptionally proud of. And they rolled that out, in fairness, pre-pandemic. That was a good solid 2 years ago they did that. So I think that's one of the key things that we've done. But I think the other thing is the leadership is very open. So I was on a call this morning prior to joining this one, talking about airflow in our offices, ventilation, because of course, as we move into the winter, we have windows wide open at the moment, and we're going to see those riots go on within the office of someone puts the aircon on and someone goes and opens a window next to it. But there was a really healthy conversation about how we're going to measure the air quality in our offices, and how we're going to deal with that. But also there isn't, again, are we going to in Condeco start to say that's a hot desk, as in warmer in terms of where it sits within the office? Our office sites are, we've got an old mill in Bath, so you can imagine what that's like for airflow and hot and cold spots. And our London office is it's got the weirdest shapes to the floor place that you've ever seen. So, but again, we're being very open about it, so there's these constant town halls once, twice a week where it's a different, and Simon will appreciate this, it's a different partner, so it's part of the leadership, part of the equity owners, actually having those open conversations with staff to say, we know this is a concern, this is what we're doing, can we also get your ideas?
Okay. Stuart, what about from the Legion's point of view? Is there any initiatives or things that you're directly doing for staff wellbeing or retention that you'd like to share?
So they're fairly basic. Trying to make it a great place to work is how I'd summarize it. But I find this fascinating. I think this is going to be the big area of innovation over the coming months, because the differentiator between when you're all working in an office as we were 2 years ago, the working environment, there was only a certain limit range of office environments from the horrible old fusty office where it was just quite full of filing cabinets and dusty and not very nice to work, through to the amazing office where there's the pool table, the beer fridge, all these different things. But that was all the range could be previously, whereas now the range, I think, of working environments that a company can offer is wide open, and so this could be a real differentiator for firms thinking about what they can offer. And working in the charity space, this is even more exciting for us, because there's so many of the things don't necessarily cost additional money. They're about how we can offer a work experience that people will enjoy as much as possible. And so I would say that at the moment we're experimenting with a lot of different things in terms of getting people in, trying to engage people, trying to offer different ways. But I think this is going to be probably the hot topic of the next 12 months, I would say. And even the simple things that you can see that people are looking at it now, because in the last few weeks, maybe in the last 2 or 3 months, I think there's been a bit of wage growth going on where the salaries are bumping up, and that's almost like the easiest quick fix, the blunt instrument for staff retention. But it's not really that's not never the answer. The answer will be about trying to create that environment, that experience, that working experience, which the options now are so much greater than they were if it's just 9 to 5 in an office 5 days a week. And so I think it will be, the range will vary tremendously across organizations, and I think there'll be lots of different experiments. And I think if people are looking around thinking of moving companies, it'll be the companies that offer that really interesting rich working experience. They'll be the ones that win through.
Simon, any thoughts on that?
I don't think really much else to add other from what Stuart and Jason have said. So, similar sort of initiatives. Jason, like you said, the whole mental sort of first aid thing, we got into probably during lockdown. We spent a lot of time on, I think I mentioned earlier, about looking after staff and their well-being, and taking into account sort of mental health issues, of which there were some certainly within our firm. And I think other than that, just trying to make the firm a really attractive place to be. So I know that actually now we've got various managers who have actually said that if hybrid working wasn't an option, they wouldn't work here. So it's trying to really now sell to prospective candidates coming into our organisation the range of kind of initiatives we've got in place, and trying to portray this as, look, it's a really great place to work. You can be in the office, you can't be out, you can be at home, and we're not going to police, as I say, your 9 to 5 kind of working patterns. And just making sure there's regular contact. So for example, in my team, we have weekly team meetings. In fact, virtually every department has at least a weekly team meeting. But we have daily sort of catch-ups as well. But also once a month, we get everybody into the office for that team meeting. And then there's, we're incentivized. So I'm allowed to take my team out for team drinks. So there's even more of a reason to come into the office. So it's just, just trying to look after staff, regular feedback. We've just changed our approach to mentoring, just to make that a lot nicer for people coming in. And, we have partner groups, partner staff groups, where partners will take the staff out and just listen to the concerns they've got, and just generally listening to feedback is, I guess, the other point for us.
Okay. Well, guys, I think this has been a fascinating insight. I've thoroughly enjoyed our discussion. It's been very interesting to hear from 3 different organizations about both the challenges that you faced and where you are now, and a little bit about where you see you're going in the future, although, you know, there's a bit of a, let's just see 3 months at a time. So I would just like to thank all of you on behalf of myself and Silverstones for taking the time out to take part in this session. I think you've done a great job, and just remains to say thank you very much, and thank you to our attendees. Thank you for joining. I hope you found that useful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.